My name is Xavier Duran. I am the Adult Programming Coordinator for the Lyle Library District. We are in what's called webinar mode, where the only active microphone and camera is the camera and microphone on my end, and the camera and microphone on our presenters end. So if you're going to town on some very delicious messy nachos, feel free to go hog wild. We won't be able to see that or hear that.
Smell it.
With that said, the only way that you can communicate with one of us is through the chat or Q&A. At the end of the program, we will take questions. Feel free to add your questions to the chat or Q&A, and we will get to those at the end of the program. With that said, let me go ahead and introduce Gail Sanders, who is our Illinois Master Gardener and presenter for this evening. Gail got her degree in education from the University of Illinois and taught middle school science and math for many years. Within the Master Gardener Extension Program, Gail volunteers on the DuPage County Care Center, WDSRA, We Grow Dreams, Worms in the Classroom teams, and volunteers at various help desks, and is a team leader on the Klein Creek Farm project. So please welcome Gail Sanders to our presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Xavier. As mentioned, I'm Gail Sanders, and I represent the University of Illinois in DuPage County and the extension. So I'm your tax dollars at work, which always makes people feel good about this. Our motto is helping people learn to grow. And tonight I'm going to help you learn about things that you can do in your garden this fall to make it grow even better next year. So at this time of the year, squirrels are scurrying around, stocking up for the winter, and we gardeners get busy because there's so many things that we need to do. It always seems in everything that there's always more to do than there's time. So make a schedule and it'll help you prioritize. And as I go through these things, remember that not everything I talk about will apply to your garden. So just to let you know I'm going to do tonight is, first of all, I'm going to go month by month and tell you things to do in your yard to get it cleaned up and gardening practices. And at the very end, there'll be 2 slides that are checklists. And Xavier, I don't have a handout for this program, but maybe what we should do is take a screenshot of those 2 slides and you could send that to participants so that they don't have to take too many notes. Then at the end, I'll give you some resources in case you need more information on any of the things I talk about. And then finally, as Xavier said, there'll be a time for questions. So it's September, so let's get started with September. And we're going to look first at the flower garden. So this is the time of the year when you would divide any spring and summer blooming perennials, things like peonies and phlox and daylily and iris. We divide them because it will help rejuvenate them and stimulate new growth. You want to do it when the plants aren't flowering. So if plants are overcrowded, they tend to compete for water and nutrients. And that will overcrowding will also restrict the airflow, which can lead to diseases. But dividing will reduce that competition. It'll stimulate the new growth, and you control the size of the plants because plants grow at varying rates. And if one perennial is overshadowing the others, you can use these dividing techniques to kind of even the playing field. So it's best to do this on a cloudy day, especially if light rain is predicted. And at the rate we're going this winter, you're going to have to forget about this fall, we're going to have to forget about the light rain stuff. The Iowa State Extension, if you go to their website, they have good information about when to divide different perennials. But one of the best things about dividing perennials is, first of all, it's an easy way and an inexpensive way to increase the number of plants you have. So instead of 1 clump of iris, now you have 2 or more clumps of irises. And another thing is you may want to share or swap plants with other gardeners. For the plants that are blooming, this is a time to deadhead them. That means, like in the upper picture, you take off the spent blossom. This will encourage additional flowers to bloom. And also you want to remove any dead or diseased plant parts. There are a few flowers that I would suggest you leave up, things like purple coneflowers or asters, black-eyed Susan, sunflowers. And the reason I wouldn't deadhead those, I would keep them up, would because many birds and some insects like the seeds from these. And I've seen lots of goldfinches on some of these flowers that have been left up to go to seed. Also, it says leave the rose blossoms on. You don't want to deadhead roses because you don't want them to continue growing. You want them to go into a dormant period, and cutting off the spent flowers will tell them, well, you need to make some more. But as the temperatures are falling and the sunlight hours are reduced, we want the roses to go into dormancy. And if you leave them on, you may even be rewarded with some lovely rose hips, which are what the seed pods look like. This is also the time of the year, especially towards the end of the month, to plant those spring flowering bulbs. They're in the stores now. I've seen them in a couple places I've been in this week. If you're going to plant them, remember that they require fertile and well-drained soil. And in general, you want to plant them 2 to 3 times deeper than the bulb height. You're going to want to plant them with the pointy end up. And if you're going to plant a lot, like in that lower picture, you may want to get a bulb planter, or if you're into tools, you can be like my friend Leslie, who has a soil auger that she attaches to a cordless drill, and she just goes around and drills holes right into the ground. It's a wonderful thing. Planting them by the end of the month is going to allow enough time to get a good root system so that they'll be better able to survive the winter. But you can plant them anytime before the ground freezes. This is also a great time to cut flowers and bring some flowers into your home. We're probably spending more time inside. It's getting darker earlier, so it'd be nice to have some fresh flowers in your home. But you can cut flowers, and this is a great time to cut herbs too, and to dry both of them. It might be nice to have a dried flower arrangement this winter. And definitely, if you're growing herbs, this is a fantastic time to cut those off and tie them in bunches, hang them upside down in a dry place until they dry, and then you can strip the leaves off the stems, put those in a jar that you cover up, but make sure they're completely dry, and then store that in a cool, dark place. Okay, now moving into the lawn and trees. So the first thing you want to think about is, do you want to plant any new trees or shrubs? The earlier you plant them in September, the better, because you want them to develop a good root system. Now, normally we count on fall moisture to help the trees and establish their root system. To do that, you're going to have to water them this year. It's just unbelievably dry. So you want them to establish this root system while the temperatures in the soil, in the air are cooler than the soil. Excuse me, I was going to get that wrong. This new root growth is encouraged without having much top growth at this time of the year. And then that will result in a tree with a stronger and better developed root system. And then next spring, when it's time for the top half to grow, the tree will be stronger. Now, if you look at this picture, you'll notice, first of all, you want to make sure not to plant them too deep. There's something called the flare of the tree. If you look at the picture, I'm trying to get my cursor to point out where the flare is. It's where the tree widens out and starts the roots. And you'll see this on bushes too. You want to make sure that this flare is at least at ground level. These things you see on either side that are a little higher are some mulch. Also notice the mulch isn't touching the base of the tree, but make sure that you don't plant it too low. If you do, it's going to encourage rotting at the lower end of the tree where this bark still is, and it'll encourage the roots to grow improperly. Some trees that are good to plant at this time of the year are ashes and buckeyes, catalpas, crabapples, maples, sycamores, and Kentucky coffee trees, to name just a few. But there are a few trees that you really should hold off on until spring. such as hemlock and magnolia and ginkgo, because they're slow to establish and probably would not get going well enough to make it through the winter. Now, all of this being said, think about where you're going to plant this tree or bush before you go out and buy it. Look at how much space you have. Are you planting under something, under another tree? Are you planting under power lines? How close is it? Do you want it to the house? And then when you're shopping, make sure you look at the tags that are attached to these trees and bushes and look at the mature size, not the size they are right now, because some of those cute little trees are going to get to be quite big. So take that into account. And also not just how tall it is, but also how wide it is, so that you don't plant something too close to your house and then regret it later when this tree is 20 years old and growing right into the side of your house. This is also a great time to aerate your lawn. And to do this, you get a machine called a core or plug aerator. They have rows of hollow tines that remove plugs of soil from the lawn and then deposit them on top of the grass where they're going to break down. You can rent one of these. We just pay to have somebody do it because the machine can get quite unwieldy. So what this does is excuse me, I'm coughing here. It opens up the soil. It relieves compaction, which is likely to happen in your grass if you're using your lawn a lot. It can improve water drainage, and these things will make your lawn less susceptible to disease and weed growth. I had a neighbor ask me about a part of his lawn that he always has weeds growing in, and when I asked him the last time he aerated his lawn, he couldn't remember. I told him that's a good place to start. So some weeds like yellow nutsedge and prostate knotweed and spotted surge like to grow in compacted soil, especially if it's a wet area. Also, if you have problems with thatch in your lawn, it's a buildup of dead grass, aerating can help with that. And if you have aerated your lawn, it's going to allow those water and nutrients to get down to the roots, which is a good thing. Now, if you're going to establish a new lawn area or reseed an existing lawn, if it's an existing lawn, this aerating can help with that too, because fall is a great time to do these lawn repairs. You can, like I said, start with aerating, and then these holes, let them break down a little bit. And when you go to seed, there'll be better contact with the soil, which is important when you go to seed. You're going to want to use something called a cool season grass, which are things like fescues and bluegrass, perennial ryegrass. So it's best to do that by the middle of the month, and we're already there. So if you want to establish a lawn, you're going to want to start that really soon. If you're putting down sod, usually you can do that until October. September is also a great time to fertilize your lawn. You can get by with fertilizing your lawn once a year. And if you do, it would be early September. If you're going to do it twice a year, early May and early September. And if you really feel you need to do it 3 times a year, add late October to that list. Okay, moving into the vegetables. As the days get shorter and cooler, many of your vegetables are slowing down their production. I'm not picking this many tomatoes anymore. So some cool season vegetables like lettuce and spinach might be getting a growth spurt. And if you still have some seed, you could probably still plant lettuce, spinach, and maybe radishes. But look at the seed packet to see how long to maturity, because we only have maybe 30, at the most 45 more days of growing. You might be able to coddle these things and cover them up and get them to grow longer, but don't do anything that's going to take 60 or 70 days to grow. In your vegetable garden, as you remove plants, you can plant something called a cover crop. And this is something you plant to slow down erosion. It can also improve your soil health, enhance the water availability, smother weeds, which I love that one, and control pests and diseases. So what is this? Well, it's a crop like red clover or vetch, annual ryegrass, mustards, or brassicas that you sow now, and they start growing this fall, and you leave them in all winter. And then in the spring, you can turn over your soil and just let those plants decompose right into the soil. And depending on which you pick, they can add nitrogen to your soil if you need it, or use up extra nitrogen if you happen to have that. They also support beneficial insects and pollinators and can improve your soil's fertility. Now, with all that being said, that's something you might want to look into. So if you want to know something about cover crops, you can look at some of the extension information I'll give you at the end. And a good independent nursery or garden center will probably be able to tell you about cover crop seeds that they may have, or that's something you can order online. Okay, additionally in September, this one is really, really, really important. We've had so much dry weather, it's really important to water, especially your evergreens. You want to make sure that plants go into the winter with adequate moisture. And right now they're still soaking up all that moisture. The soil is still warm. So keep watering them. It's especially important with evergreens because they're going to lose more water through their needles as they go through the winter. The deciduous trees, the ones that have lost their leaves, it'll be important for them, but extremely important for evergreens. Also, at this time, do not fertilize your evergreens. Fertilizing them will encourage them to add new growth, which probably will not make it through the winter. So don't do that to them. This one I know none of us want to hear, but you do need to continue weeding. They'll be harder to take out if you let them go, the longer you let them go. And definitely get rid of them before they go to seed. 1 or 2 plants can produce hundreds of seeds. So get rid of them. As you go through the year, next year, as soon as you see them flowering, make sure you get rid of them before they can even set seed. This is a great time to start a compost pile if you don't have one. Pictured are my 2 compost bins here. So this is a place where you're going to add this debris as you're picking it up and put it in your compost bin. But do not put in anything that's diseased or infested with insects. That should go into the yard waste that gets picked up at the end of your driveway. The reason is a compost bin that you have at home, like mine are shown here, they're going to heat up and decompose, but they're not going to heat up enough to kill those pathogens. And if they're in your compost bin, when you go to spread your compost next year, you're going to be reintroducing them to your garden. Don't want to do that. 1 year of them is enough. Okay, finally in September, looking at your house plants. This is the time to start bringing them indoors. Our temperatures, not tonight, but our temperatures many evenings have dropped below 55 degrees. And that's usually the temperature where you want to start bringing them in. You don't need to bring them right into the house right away, maybe into the garage for a couple of days till they get used to a little less light. Before you bring them in, check the foliage and soil for insects. Now, you don't have to use an insecticide at this point. Remember, you're going to be bringing these in the house, but try spraying the foliage with a steady stream of water to spray off the insects and flush the pots with water to drive out any insects that are soil-borne. This obviously is easier to do outside while it's still warm. But if you look at your plant and it's heavily infested, it might just be better to dispose of it and start with something new. You also might want to dig up some of your herbs to bring them in, things like basil and cilantro, lemongrass. Those aren't going to make it through the winter. So if you want to keep them for next year or be able to use them during the winter, pot them up and bring those in. It'd be nice to have some fresh herbs in the winter. And just they love the herbs love a sunny windowsill. If any of those houseplants are overgrown, this is a great time to repot them. If you're going to do this, make sure you use a fresh soilless mix. You don't want to use garden soil or, well, potting soils will work. Another thing to do is to take cuttings from plants you would like to overwinter. I've started taking cuttings from my coleus. I've become a big coleus fan. I love the different colors that you can get the leaves in. So every year I take cuttings, and then the next year I don't even have to go out and buy coleus plants. I can just use those cuttings to start my new pots. If you were able to save a poinsettia or Christmas cactus from last year and you'd like it to bloom for the holidays, this is the time to set it on its light dark schedule. So that would be, you need 10 hours of light and 14 hours of complete darkness. Best way to get that is to put a box over them for those 14 hours, because it's just too easy to forget and turn on a light or the light from the hallway. If you're like me, you're going to do something like go to Cantini's poinsettia sale and get some poinsettias there. I've never been successful getting them to rebloom for me, at least not for Christmas. Okay, on to October. That was plenty to do in September. So first of all, it's getting colder. So if you're watching the weather and you notice that they're predicting a light frost, you'll want to protect some tender plants and annuals. So things, you can put newspapers over them or plastic or light cloth like a sheet. But you do need to remember as it warms up the next day to please take those off. Don't let them sit under plastic or something else for days and days. After we do get a frost, you'll want to lift the tender perennials like that beautiful calla lily that's shown there, or if you have dahlias or gladiola or begonias. If you want to keep those for next year and not treat them at perennials, this is the time to bring them in. When you do, you let them dry for a few days before storing them, and then store them in peat or vermiculite. You like to ideally keep them between 50 and 60 degrees in a place with low humidity. The year of the polar vortex, I forgot they were in the garage, got way too cold. You can't let them get really cold. That will kill them. Okay, and after you get a frost, that's going to kill most of your annuals. So remove them, don't leave them in the ground over the winter. They are unsightly. They allow places for insects and critters to hide. And if you've started that compost pile and they're not diseased, you can throw them in there. And this is the time when you would remove the faded flowers from those perennials, except for those few I said you might want to keep up, and then cut them back, especially anything that's lost its green color. Okay, vegetable garden. You want to make sure you pick your vegetables before you freeze. If you have some tomatoes that aren't quite ripe, bring those in. If they've even started to turn color, if they're not that dark green color, they will probably ripen indoors. Also, if you have pumpkins or winter squash, they're going to stand a frost, which is the 32 degrees, but not a freeze, which we call a freeze 28 degrees. Potatoes and sweet potatoes should be dug up before we get down to that 28 degrees. But if you're growing carrots, beets, parsnips, those root crops, they can stay in the soil. You may want to mulch them to keep them from freezing. Also, if any fruit has fallen, any tomatoes, anything else has fallen onto the soil, make sure you clean that up too. Okay, if you have things, like I said, that plant debris can go into the compost pile. But if things are diseased, you notice on these tomato plants here, all this browning over here, I picked the tomatoes, but I wouldn't put this tomato foliage into my compost bin. All right, if you've grown things in containers, this is a time to empty the containers. That soil can be added to your garden beds. And used potting soil loses much of its organic content. So you may want to just start anew the next year. When you've got the containers empty, clean them out. A mild bleach solution with 1 part of bleach to 10 parts of water is good to do this. And then bring those containers indoors. Now, these 2 plastic ones would probably survive the outdoor weather, but anything that's ceramic, cement, or terracotta would probably, well, has a very good likelihood of cracking when we have the frost and thaw cycles that we do. Fall is an excellent time to have a soil test. What shape is your soil in after this growing season? So you'll get the information back in plenty of time to get an idea of what you'd need to do in the spring. The Extension Service does not do soil tests, but it has a list of companies that do them. You wouldn't want to amend your soil with fertilizer now because you don't want things to keep growing. You want them to be dormant. So at least this will give you an idea of what you'll need to do in the spring. Another thing you can do is you can add organic matter to your beds. If you have compost and shredded leaves, you can add them to your beds and just dig them in at this point in time. And that way things will have time to break down and be ready for your plants to use in the spring. Okay, on to the lawn and trees. So first of all, October doesn't mean you get to stop mowing the lawn. You want to keep it at that 2 to 3 inch height that it should have been all summer. You don't want to cut it real low for the winter. And if you have some perennial weeds, that our favorite, Creeping Charlie, this is a time to treat those. And the reason being is in the fall, the plants start drawing their nutrients into the roots to overwinter. And they will also be drawing in anything you put on them to try and kill them off. I love this maple that I saw on a walk one day, but I looked at the tree ring here, this area around the tree. It should have been kept free of weeds for 2 reasons. Number one, the plants that are growing here are competing with the tree for nutrients. And we want to give our tree the best chance we can. This is not a very big tree. And second of all, if you go to mow, you can cause damage to the trunk of the tree. If you're mowing with your mower, you might bump into it when you get close. And heaven forbid your string trimmer should get too close and start cutting through the bark. The reason being that right under the bark are the tissues that allow water to go up to the tree and nutrients to spread throughout the tree. And if you damage the bark, you're very likely to damage that. And that could cause decline and possibly death for your tree. As the leaves come down, you want to make sure you rake them. If you rake them onto a hard surface, you can mow over them with your lawnmower. As long as you have the bagger on, you can collect those leaves and you can use them to amend the soil, or later on you can use them for mulch. It's an environmentally friendly thing to do and it'll save you money. I don't know about in Lisle, but up here, our stuff that goes to the end of the curb has to have a tag on it, and we have to pay for those tags. And finally, in October, take a drive, enjoy those fall colors. They only happen once a year. So go around. Maybe you like a tree like this one that I've shown here. Now, this is on a residential property, but if you go to someplace like the Morton Arboretum or Chicago Botanic Garden or Cantini Park, many of their specimens are labeled. So if you see something you like, you can actually find out what it is that's growing there and think about maybe that's something you want to add to your property in the next year. So it's not just trees, there's lots of beautiful bushes too. Okay, on to November. Now, you might have just cut your perennials down. Now's the time to cut them to the ground. They probably won't be green like these that I've shown here in the lower picture. But you want to clean this up. If you don't, you're leaving a place for pathogens and insects to overwinter. Now the ground should be starting to get really cooled off. We've had a couple of frosts by now. This would be the time to mulch perennials and roses. The goal is to keep the soil cold. We don't want it warming up when we have those warm days. We want to keep it cold. And straw and those shredded leaves work really well for this. But what you should do is keep whatever mulch you use away from the base of the plant. You don't want to get it real close and let those pathogens and those insects and critters start chomping away on your plants. If you're like me and you have fall bearing raspberries, this would be the time to prune them. And the extension has information on pruning. I know we don't want to hear it, but keep weeding. The weeds are competing for nutrients, so get rid of them and give your plants the best advantage. Something that you may not consider is you might want to leave a small area of your landscape undisturbed. I have a back corner that I don't see very much, and I let the leaves gather there and the twigs, because I want a place for some of my insects, my beneficial insects, to overwinter. Some butterflies overwinter in the chrysalis stage. They need a place to do this. So I leave that place, and then I have to remember the spring not to clean it up right away, because I will clean it up in the spring, because it'll take a while before they come out of hibernation. You can also leave any unusual seed heads or ornamental grasses up for winter interest, because you need something to look at when it gets those cold winter months. Okay, to the lawn. Continue the mowing. Mow your grass if it's still growing. If it's growing, you need to be mowing. Don't let it get too long going into the winter, because if it does, it can mat down, and that'll make it more susceptible to lawn diseases. After the final mowing, it's gotten too cold, it's not mowing, you're not going to mow anymore. Now's the time to service your lawnmower, which probably just means definitely clean it off. Look at your owner's manual. You might be removing a spark plug or replacing oil. I don't know that you have to take it to be serviced at this point. That you could do a little in very early spring. If you have low spots, it's a good time to fill them, especially if they're in your flower or vegetable gardens. And maybe some of those leaves that you've shredded up can go in to fill it up. Like I said, continue raking those leaves. If you don't, they can accumulate and mat down over your desirable turf and possibly smother the grass and kill it, especially if you have trees with big leaves like maples and oaks. This is also the time to not just mulch your flowers, but also mulch around trees and shrubs for the same reason, and make sure that the mulch is not touching the base. We don't want you to pile that mulch up along the tree. We call that volcano mulching. Not good for the tree. You want to make sure there's no mulch touching the bark of the tree. And your mulch should look, as you look at it from above, it should look more like a donut than a cone. Something that's important to do is to drain anything that's got water in it. The reason being is that as water freezes, it expands. So take that garden hose, unhook it, and drain the water out of it. If you have a rain barrel or a fountain, those of you with irrigation systems, pipes need to be bled, drained, and blown out. Like I said, if water expands, I don't know if you've ever had the problem with water pipes freezing and bursting. because as that water expands, it'll just, if it can break up a metal pipe, imagine what it can do to your hoses. All right, November houseplants. They've been in maybe for a month now, so look and see how they're doing. It's not unusual for them to lose some leaves or to yellow some, but you may need to adjust their light. Maybe they need to be in a sunnier window. Maybe you need supplemental lighting, a grow light. Another problem is the humidity. Our houses tend to be very dry in the winter, and that doesn't mean you should water your plants more often. They don't need wet soil, they need humid air. So you can accomplish this by getting a tray and putting, well, it'd have to have a little bit of a lip on it, putting some rocks in it, and then putting water into almost to the top of the rocks, not to the top, and then setting the plants on top of that. As the water evaporates, it'll add moisture to the air around the plant. Another thing you can do is group your plants together, and they will help keep the air a little more humid right around them. November is a great time to look and see what garden chemicals you have. Now, I've got a bunch of things pictured here. The extension does not endorse the use of any of these particular chemicals. These are just ones that we found to take a picture of. So I'm looking at that Ortho Weed Be Gone in the middle. It's looking like it's been around for quite a while. Check to see if there's expiration dates. Is there something you bought that you're not going to use? Now's the time to get rid of it. And do not throw it in your municipal waste. You're close enough to Naperville. Naperville out on Route 59, I believe, has a hazardous waste facility. That's where all these yard chemicals go. Although from time to time, different municipalities have, this is considered hazardous waste. They have hazardous waste pickup for things, or they have events with other recycling type things. So get rid of anything you're not going to use or anything that's looking rather old. And then what's left should be stored in a locked case. Some of these things, when you read the safety warnings on them, you want to make sure nobody gets into these that doesn't know what they're doing. Also, especially the liquids should be kept somewhere where they're not going to freeze. Now, besides inventorying your chemicals, let's inventory your tools. Look at what's broken. Can it be fixed? What could you have used this year? Make a list and you can add it to your holiday wish list. Tools are always a great gift to get. If you're a person who throws their own snow, now's the time to start up that snow thrower. Hopefully you'll do it before the first snowfall to make sure it works, because if it needs maintenance, you'll be able to get it before you actually need the snow thrower. If you're going to decorate with holiday lights, November is a great time to start putting those up. You don't have to turn them on, but you can put them up. Much easier to put them up before it gets too cold, especially if you're going to do something extravagant like the upper picture. Now, no, that's not my house. That's Lilacia Park in Lombard. Okay, finally, the last month of the year, December. We don't have as much to do in this month. So if you haven't kept a garden journal, now's a good time to take a trip around your yard, walk around and make notes. Is there something that worked really well or something that grew very well this year? Write it down. You might want to get more of that plant. Or is there something that was problematic? Is there a plant that didn't seem to grow where it was and you've thought of a better place to put it? If you had a vegetable garden, you want to make a sketch of your garden and write down what you had growing where, because it's always a good idea to rotate crops. Tomatoes in the same place every year are going to draw the same nutrients from the soil, and after not too many years, going to exhaust those nutrients. So plant them somewhere else next year. I needed to do this all year this year. I had terrible problems with rabbits eating anything and everything they could. So I've installed some animal protection already, but for the winter, I'm going to need something with a little finer, smaller holes than what I've got here in this bottom picture, because I want to keep out not only the rabbits, but also the mice and the voles. And to do that, the cage should be 2 to 3 inches below ground, so those mice and voles can't get to the plant underground, and 18 to 24 inches above ground. Now, I may not prevent all of the damage, but at least I'll try to minimize it. That button bush was planted there because I took out a burning bush. The rabbits used to love to chew the bark on that every year, and eventually I had to get rid of it. So, but maybe there's wildlife you want in your yard. So if you want to see birds and you haven't put up your bird feeder, December is none too early to get that up. So plan to feed what you want in your yard and find ways to exclude the others. Now, wildlife also needs water in the winter. So if you really want to see those birds in your yard, you might want to consider a heated bird bath, because they'll really flock your yard if you've got one of those. This next one is something that I never do in December. By December, I need a rest from my garden and I'm too busy with other indoor things. So dormant pruning, that means prune the trees when there's no leaves on them. We don't want to prune when the sap is running. We like to prune in these cold months, also because we can see the structure of the tree or the bush. You can see if there's any water spouts coming up, or suckers, or are there any branches that are crossing and rubbing against them. One of the things you should avoid pruning in the winter are any spring flowering plants, because you might be pruning off this next year's flower display. So things like lilacs and forsythia, you don't want to prune in the winter. The general rule is if they flower before the middle of June, then wait till after they flower, and then immediately after their flower, that would be the time to prune them. And as it says in parentheses, you can wait till February or March to do this pruning. The main concern, like I said, is to make sure you're not making cuts when the sap is running. Now, living where we do, most people use salt on their driveways and sidewalks. So think about that. Think about your landscape when you're shoveling and throwing the snow that's been salted. Many of our plants are not salt tolerant. You can find a list of salt tolerant plants, but as you go to throw the snow, maybe when you're shoveling your sidewalk, you want to throw it into the grassy area rather than into a flower bed. Or maybe you want to shovel first and then put the salt down. Or maybe you want to use a substitute, maybe calcium chloride instead of sodium chloride, the regular salt. Or maybe just sand will be enough if you don't need to melt anything. Sand will give you the traction. Now, you're not going to have much control over the area of your property that's close to the street. Because when those snowplows go by, they don't care where they throw that salted slush and snow. So think about what you've got growing down there, and you may want to change what you've got planted if you can't control where the salt's going to go. Okay, December, great time to clean your tools. If you didn't put them away clean, now is a good time to get out a bucket of soapy water and wash those tools off with a brush and then dry them. And the metal parts can be coated, I'm sorry, not coated. The metal parts, you can be wiped down with some oil. And if you have wooden handles they can be lightly sanded and then coated with linseed oil to keep them in good shape. If you're going to sharpen your own tools, make sure you're wearing safety equipment, or there's places that will sharpen them professionally. But if you've got tools that you're having trouble getting a sharp edge on, you may want to consider getting rid of them. And another great thing for your wish list. And remember, sharp tools are easier to work with. So that's a good indoor thing to do when the weather's getting cold. If you're getting or giving holiday plants and they come in those nice foil wrappers, you're going to make sure to punch a few holes in the bottom so they drain. But if you're giving them away, make sure you tell the person that you've done this. And the reason to do this is when you water them, you want the water to run through. And if you don't punch holes, your plants are going to be sitting in a water bath, and they can easily drown and die. So put a saucer under them to catch that water. And once it's all run through, throw the water out that's in the saucer and put it back under the plant. Finally, the last thing to do after the holidays, sit yourself down. The garden catalogs will start coming in, and start dreaming about the next season. Remember, when you get to the end of the year, it's only 15 weeks till spring. Okay, Xavier, this is one of the slides when I get to the end of it that you may want to take a picture of and send it, or the people who are watching may want to take a screenshot when I get to the end of this, because this is just a general checklist. All right. One thing you want to consider, reduce your carbon footprint by planting a tree or a shrub. Especially if your perennials are easily reseeded, you're going to want to get those cut back, and so that you don't overwinter things you don't want to keep. You can extend the season by cutting flowers and herbs for drying. Like I said, remove that plant debris, especially if it's diseased or infected, and do not put that in a compost pile. Make sure you get rid of pests before you bring your houseplants indoors. This is a great time to start a compost pile with the leaves and the annuals removed from your garden. Clean your containers now and then store them. So when it's spring and you're anxious to get started, they'll be all ready to go. And get the water out of anything that's been holding water before it freezes and expands. We don't want them to burst. Okay, that's the end of this slide. I have one more, so I'll give you a second if you want to take a screenshot of this. Okay, that was the yard, now the garden. So if you would like to have some lovely spring blooming bulbs, you can still plant them. Remember, if you have any left over, you can try and force them for an even earlier indoor bloom. Paper white narcissus are great for that too, to bring just for indoors, not so much for outdoors. Mow that grass until it stops. You don't want it to go too high into the winter. Till the vegetable garden so it's ready. Now, I don't say rototill. This says till. That means turn over the soil, especially if you've put some leaves or some compost onto it. So things will be ready. And don't do this when the soil is wet. That will harm the soil itself, the texture of the soil. You may want to leave ornamental grasses and some interesting seed heads so you have something to look at this winter when it's all snowy. Once the ground freezes, if you need to mulch, I talked about mulching, but if you've already got mulch done, you may not need to add additional mulch. Just check to make sure it's not right up against the base of the trees and bushes and plants. After the frost, dig up those tender bulbs, unless you're going to treat them as annuals. Especially important the way this year has been, continue to deep water as long as you can keep those hoses out. Don't let your evergreens go into the winter thirsty. They'll be healthier next year if you do get a good drink before the cold weather. That's the end of the second slide that you may want to take a shot of. Okay, resources. There's something called impact.extension.org that has resources from all the extensions across the country. When you're looking through that to get more information, it's best to use extensions that are close to us. University of California Extension won't be giving us information that we necessarily need or can use in Illinois. The Morton Arboretum is also an excellent resource, especially for information about trees. And if you want to search the Illinois extension, just look horticultureillinois.extension. Or if you have specific questions, there's a Master Gardener helpline for DuPage County. And the address is extension.illinois.edu /DKK /contact. You can email a question. If you have a picture that will help us understand your problem more, just send that in, and then a Master Gardener will get back to you with a research-based answer to your questions. To recap, I went month by month giving you ideas for yard cleanup and gardening. And at the end, a checklist, resources. And I did not do all the work on this program by myself. I took information that Bruce Black from Carroll and Whiteside counties, more on the western side of the state, did. And then, of course, I made some additions of my own. And we still have time left. So if there were questions in the chat box or something that I didn't mention that you have questions about, go for it.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. The first question is, can you perform the soil test in the spring?
You can, but what happens in the spring is the soil labs get busy. Farms do it then too, and it may take too long to get back, and you may want to get some of those things done. You may want to do any amending you have to do right away so that you can start getting to things to grow. That's why we suggest it for the fall.
All right. The next question, is it okay to add weeds to compost, or should that go in the recycled paper bag?
Okay, I do add some weeds. There's some things I don't add. I don't add any weeds that are flowering. So if my dandelion has flower on it at all, it doesn't go in. I don't add obnoxious weeds like Creeping Charlie to my compost bin, but young weeds that haven't flowered, I do add those to my compost bin. They're going to break down. Just don't add anything that's got flowers or seeds on it.
Do you recommend wrapping Arbor Vitae for winter?
Are you talking Arbor Vitae, the plant, or?
Yeah, ARBOVITE.
Okay, if they mean the evergreen Arbor Vitae, I don't do anything. If that's a trade name for a paper wrap that you put around trees, young trees, I have not used that. I'm trying to think of what I just read. Oh, I just read that if you're doing it to keep animals from harming your tree, that it's probably better to use a wire mesh around the tree than that. But I have never used that. That doesn't mean you can't. I just never have.
It looks like that is all the questions, unless someone's typing at the moment.
So that was ARBOVITE.
Yeah, capital ARBOVITE.
Okay.
Oh, two other questions came in. Are you supposed to cover a hydrangea base in mulch?
You don't cover the base of anything in mulch. You don't want mulch right up against any plant.
And another one, where can I get wire mesh?
Any of the big box stores, they have a variety of different gauges of wire. You might want to look over by where they keep the fencing.
Oh, it is the person that asked about the it's ARBORVITE.
Arbor Vitae, that's the plant. I don't ever wrap mine. You have to watch for heavy snows, although lately they've not even been recommending to brush heavy snows off of it, because I know that will bend down the Arbor Vitae, and you know, you could have some breakage with that. But I don't wrap mine. Of course, I bought a type of Arbor Vitae that's less likely to have that problem. But I know what you mean. You don't want them to get so much snow on them that they bend over and break. You know what? Why don't you send that question on the Arbor Vitae to the extension question, because they'll be able to do a little bit more research on that and get back to you about that. That address that let's see if I go, oops, wrong way. It would be this site right here. If you'll send that question to them. The last I heard was not to, but they can check that for sure.
All right, it looks like that's all the questions in the Q&A portion. Gail, thank you so much for that wonderful breakdown of what you do month by month in the coming months. And for everyone else, this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel soon. And thank you so, oh, sorry about that. What was the Arbor Vitae she bought?
The one I bought a Technique. They're much wider. They're a real broad Arbor Vitae, as opposed to the emerald green, which are the skinnier ones.
And another question about the Arbor Vitae, the seed class?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Oh, sorry about that. And I am so sorry. There's a couple of people asking about seed saving. That will be in October. So watch out for our event calendar. It should be posted. It should be posted in our connection newsletter soon. So yeah, so watch out for that. Yeah. And Gail, once again, thank you so much for your expertise and a breakdown of month by month. Yeah, thank you so much for your time this evening.
You're welcome. Well, everybody get a good night's sleep, because you got a lot of work to do out there. Good night.